then you have to really ask yourself a simple question. Do you serve the people you lead in your organization, or do you serve yourself? So one of the things I think that's really intriguing is that, people master their business domain, and naturally when it goes well, they think that's success. But we live in an interconnected world where there are much bigger issues, which then, like tidal waves, wipe out those areas, even though they think they're doing well. And that's what Global Forecaster is about, giving you much greater context to the way the world got to this moment, why it got here, how it got here, and where the risks are. So I would argue right now, and it's a difficult message to communicate, that we are already in World War III. It started with the invasion of Ukraine. It was followed up by the issues and the attack on Israel. It's now subsequently going to be escalated because the Iranian nuclear threat has to be removed. We've seen it in Pakistan and India. And these outbreaks have one common center, and that's China's challenge to the West. If China wasn't there, none of these outbreaks would happen. No one would be bold enough to act individually. So the real puppet master behind all of this is China, and China's aspirations are to dominate our world. They build technology to dominate other populations. They dominate their own population. Make no mistake, this is the biggest, greatest threat Western civilization has ever faced, and we are asleep, and we have been asleep. So the consequences for a business are, what business are you? And I would ask the question, if you're making handbags in a wartime environment, you're probably not going to go so well because it's going to become a luxury. But if you're doing something that's aligned with the sustenance of the economy through a wartime long-term construct, you're in the right place. So are you in the right place is the question. The next issue is, do you have debt structures? And if you do, I guarantee you interest rates are going through the roof. So whatever you're paying now, you extend your duration, you finance yourself. And that's really important. And the other part of it is just understanding what effect that might have on your labor force, because you might lose some of your labor force, unfortunately, if, as Ukraine has found out, when it's drawn away to conflict. So there's considerations here which are very difficult. And, there's a huge sense of a duty of care in business. And we've all gone through the ESG duties of care. But duty of care is going to come down to, how do you survive air raids? How do you survive lack of water? And this is a company obligation, so there should be strategies around that. And I say this not because I want to scare the pants off you all, but because it needs to be said, and other countries in Europe are already saying it. But in Britain particularly, we have a huge level of dissonance led from the top down, that it's all okay out there, and it really isn't. And so it comes back to organizations, rather than the government, if they refuse to do it, to start making their own preparations. And that's one of the things that I do. I work with my clients and I consult with them to make sure that their profile starts to become more resilient and more adaptive. And as news comes in that they wouldn't interpret the way I would, their heads up comes earlier. For example, I warned everyone the pandemic was coming in December beforehand, because I'd written about the pandemic in my book, Breaking the Code of History. I saw all the signs, and I'd hypothesized the next big pandemic would come from a Chinese weapons laboratory and be highly transmissible. And that was the hallmarks of that particular outbreak. Because quite simply, they can go out of business overnight. It's that simple. It's a matter of survival now. We can no longer assume the continuum of our way of life from day to day. And therefore, we need resilience, and we need to understand the threats we face, which is what Global Forecaster's work is about. I have a number of models which make me quite uniquely placed. One of them is this big picture model, which has frighteningly predicted the past 20 years into where we are right now, in all the details, from the swings of politics to the way we behave. It's rather alarming, actually, how predictable we've been. But I also have a market construct of every market that moves in the world as part of a giant holographical system. And in my study of previous conflicts, markets have a very interesting preemptive capability to essentially predict conflict moments and where turning points are. And I would argue that all of our markets point towards the imminence of this particular, this escalatory phase, and we all need to take it really seriously. And if we take it seriously and it doesn't happen, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. But actually, by doing so, we make ourselves more resilient and slightly less likely to go to war because we're no longer asleep, and the predatory countries and nations that are looking at us no longer think we're an easy target. So it has, whatever we choose, the preemption of this process is critical to our mindsets. And it's important for business because I've learned you lose the most money when you're surprised. When something happens quickly and it's really an urgent process and you have no construct of framing it because you're living in an adrenal space. Well, global forecasters' work is designed to mean you're not surprised. And so far, we have prevented surprises for all that follow us all the way through this, well, I'd say entropic period from 1919 onwards, which is historically entropic. Such a great question. I think actually the strategic thinking of our current military needs to learn from history, first of all, because we have forgotten grand strategy. And grand strategy is a nation's vision of its place in the world and all of the pillars it needs to manifest its statehood, whether it's trade, whether it's diplomacy, whether it's immigration, whether it's tax policy that encourages growth or not, and its defense according to the threats it faces. And sadly, grand strategy is totally absent from the Western world. It's one of my big topics. I've written a lot about it. I've studied every empire's strategy of success and failure, and they all come down to very common pieces. Unity of command is one, as in one organization in command. So that's important because I'm not really sure one person is in command of actually our government. I think no one's in command. So we're not going to learn from that one. So I think that's the first lesson, is your command structure needs to be appropriate. And this is a very difficult thing. If you're a lateral person in charge of a business, then your time has come. But you need to surround yourself by linear people to execute the disciplined, iterative process of a grand strategy. If you're a linear thinker, and what I'm saying is really quite offensive, because you find this concept difficult, that there are other humans who think differently, then you have to really ask yourself a simple question. Do you serve the people you lead in your organization, or do you serve yourself? If you serve the people you lead, you need to surround yourself by adaptive lateral thinkers who are going to irritate the hell out of you, to create adaptive strategies to get your business to the new place. And if you do that, you can succeed, especially if you have good political skills to hold it all together. But adaptation is a must now, and that's the biggest lesson of all. We need to adapt. And I suggest that actually in the civilian context, if you've come to my site, there are all sorts of things I've written about grand strategies of empires, and they're all remarkably similar. And I wrote one about the grand strategy that Britain should be executing now. And from that, it would give you an awful lot of indications as to basically what you would do within your piece of that as a business in the UK or anywhere in the world. Well, first of all, I would ask them to try not to hold on to their initial adrenal response when they go from dissonance, if they come with a sense of dissonance, to being exposed to reality. And my first phase of this process is to say, wake up, this is how we got here, this is our reality. But my real message is, once we do that, we can start adapting. We can start finding better ways. We can re-dynamize our country. We can face it towards the threats we face, and we can do it coherently and together. And in that mindset, we have the best chance of success and survival.